Hey, it's Drodio and Erica from Founder Culture, and we're here with Audrey Prashker, as well as Dennis and Matt, two other subject matter experts and founders from Founder Culture. And we're here to talk with Audrey today about all things M&A and finance related as it pertains to startups raising capital, but also going through M&A processes with large companies. And Audrey, you were at Verizon for a number of years, where you were VP and General Counsel of Capital Markets. Is that right?
I was VP General Counsel Capital Markets my last 4 years. I held other roles during my 25 years at Verizon.
Wow. Oh, that's amazing. Okay, so you and Verizon grew up a lot as well. I mean,
Yes.
I
I started
remember.
with 9X and
Yeah.
went through the 9X Bell Atlantic merger, the Bell Atlantic GT merger, the MCI acquisition. So I was there through it all.
Wow. Okay. So lots of change both internally and externally. Well, it would be great to just start with some of the top tips that you have for startups at really any stage where you'd like to start sharing your perspective. So we've got a number of early stage founders in founder culture, and we've also got scale up founders. And some of those scale up founders are looking at M&A opportunities with larger companies like a Verizon, for example. So where would you like to start?
I guess I wanted to follow up on some stuff that Dennis had said earlier,
Mhm.
and that is that a lot of founders don't think about the legal niceties when they're starting up their companies for a lot of
Yeah.
different reasons. They don't have time, they don't have the expertise. They're trying to get their products out there. They're getting them developed. They're getting them to market, and when you try to then go for financing or later on to an M&A process, either to get out of the financing arrangement or for some other reason, the corporate governance isn't there. The corporate
Mhm.
governance isn't in place. And a lot of the founders don't understand that when a company like a Verizon or another big company comes in to start looking at them, they're going to want to understand what they were doing. And one of the things
Mhm.
Dennis talked about was privacy and security. If you don't see that there, you get nervous. If you don't see that they have a corporate governance structure, you get nervous, and you want that to be developed and clean before you're going to put money into these operations to make sure that these companies are going to be able to function going forward as they grow and as they develop. And so some of the things that we had to do with some of the startups that we got involved with is, in essence, help them clean up their companies to make them viable or financeable. Another thing that some of the startups didn't understand is the differences between, a bond, a debt issuance, a preferred stock issuance, an equity issuance, and what that would mean when someone came in and gave them money, or when someone came in and tried to develop some kind of M&A situation for them, whether it
Mhm.
was buying in and taking partial ownership, whether it was a full buyout, or something else in the structure. And there are many, many different ways that you can structure obtaining money. And it's, I think, important for the founders to understand how those work and what it means for
Mhm.
them, not only when they get the money, but for the 5 to 10 years out after that, where they're going to be developing their businesses. And I think a lot of founders don't think about that early on
Mhm.
because they're so
Mhm.
worried about everything else.
Yeah, I mean, being a founder is basically putting off as much possible for future pain while dealing with whatever the fire is, whether it's, initial product market fit or whatever. And at the same time understanding and realizing that, if only I did a few things better now, I would save a lot of pain in the future. And I think, to your point exactly, one of the huge things that I'm hopeful that we can do with founder culture is to help founders understand what those couple things are that they could be doing early that's going to really help them later. And one of the things that I had this exact problem when I sold a company was, we did not have anything set up. It was a complete mess, and it was a very painful and very expensive to retroactively go back and try to get our ducks in a row. And one of the I haven't actually thought about us writing this up in founder culture, but maybe we should, is to show a founder how to really create a data room early, because you're going to need
Right.
data rooms when you're doing, your scale up rounds.
So I'd say even like back it up one step from that. One thing every founder should do is go to their lawyer and say, give me the due diligence checklist that an acquirer is going to ask me for when they found the company, because you'll look at that and there are things that you just don't think about, right? It's exactly Audrey's point. It's like, oh, I'm going to have to produce all my board meeting minutes. Geez, that means I need to take board meeting minutes and let me have a dedicated file in a Google Drive for them. Great. What's next on the list? And just run down and like.
That's such a good idea.
Disclosure schedules and, due diligence in transactions will kill you.
Or,
I mean, and things as simple as employment agreements. How did you bring in someone on board as a, whether they were an employee, whether they were a stockholder, whether they were a partner, what was the relationship between them? Because one of the things what we often found is that no one ever really knew exactly what the details are of the relationship between the individuals. And that was a problem for us because we wanted to make sure, whether it was in an acquisition or just a seed financing situation, that the people were going to be there moving forward, because the people are what grew the business and the people what were important to the business. And if they weren't going to be around after we put in our money, it was going to be a problem for us.
Did we get invention assignments from all of those employees? Is their employment agreement even complete? I remember one that really tripped me up was like, what are all the NDAs you ever signed? It's like, I wasn't keeping track of NDAs that I signed. And I think this is absolutely a place where a little bit of structure and prevention can stave off a lot of pain. So it might be really interesting to create some founder culture content that just has like, here is what some of those checklists might look like. Like, at least we can give you a guide of the things that you don't know, and then you should go talk to your attorney to get it figured out for your specific company. So that's an idea of some content that we could create. So if you're a founder and you're watching this and you would like to have something like that, please let me or Erica know, and we could work with Audrey and others to at least get you started on that. So that's a really, really, really great tip, Audrey. Thank you for that. And then you also talked a little bit in the M&A process, or sorry, in the just understanding what the different options are for financing. You mentioned debt versus equity, and I think one thing that I also got tripped up on in a past company was debt can look really sexy and really attractive and really easy, but it sits above the stack. It sits above the equity stack, and so it can actually be quite complicated and quite a pain. And I see, Matt, I see you smiling about this. So
one of my independent board members years ago, this guy Scott Weiss, who you might know in the Valley, he built Ironport Systems and sold it to Cisco. He was a very colorful board member. Every time we talked about debt in the boardroom, he would just say, "Remember, everybody, you have to pay that shit back."
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and also there's a lot of covenants that come along with taking that debt that can really restrict the flexibility that a founder has to build the company. In fact, I was just talking to a founder this morning that was having some problems around that. So Audrey, it sounds like you've got
there are covenants as to what you can do, just day-to-day business sometimes. There are financial covenants sometimes, and then there's also covenants around M&A. Which may restrict what you can do in the future. And whether it's just debt, straight debt, or whether it's debt with some kind of equity kicker, or whether it's some preferred stock situation, you're going to have to deal with the people who gave you that money before you're going to be able to do anything else. And then that's something I don't think a lot of people realize, because they're so, I don't want to use the word desperate, but they so want the funding and the financing that they're willing to give some stuff up earlier in order to get that financing. And then in the end, it sometimes comes back to bite them.
Well, let's talk about smart ways to leverage debt. And I'm gonna posit what I have experienced, and I'd love to get feedback from any of you, which is, when we do an equity round, we typically would go to like SVB and we'll get a debt line that we can draw on, and we usually pay for that with some amount of warrant coverage. And then the way that I think about actually drawing that debt line down is in a really terrible scenario or a really great scenario. So really great would be we're getting some product market fit, things are hitting. If we can, extend our runway by 6 months, we can do our next financing round at a substantially better, post money valuation, less dilution, and we're very confident that that's true. Or in a really terrible situation where we're almost out of cash and we need the debt to serve as a lifeline so that we can get to some milestone that we wouldn't otherwise be able to meet. The debt can also be helpful there. Otherwise, don't touch it. So that's my starting position. Who has thoughts or feedback on that? When else is debt good or bad or other to what I described? Audrey, you look like you have some opinions.
Yeah, I there's no good answer to that, because I think it really depends on the company's and the company's prospects, and the timing on that, which is always so hard to answer. I mean, obviously SVB is the biggest in this area, and so they're very they have lots of different ways of dealing with their warrant structure and versus their debt structure. And the problem is the minute you take down the debt and some of the other stuff you think is going to happen doesn't come to fruition, you run the risk that they're going to come in and take over your company. And so I think a lot of it depends on if you have some contracts that you really believe are going to come to fruition soon, and you're just using it as a short-term backstop, and you're very confident in that, you can take down a little bit here and a little bit there to carry you on to the next stage, and it's not a big problem. But at the same time, if you take it down and those prospects, in the situation you were talking about where you're almost out of cash and you don't have anything else, and then you take it down and the other stuff doesn't come to fruition, then you've lost your company. So I don't think there's a one stop fits all answer. It's a very specific to the company, what the company's doing, what the company's prospects are, how far along they are in that development stage, and how close they are to really having customers who are going to have a stream of funding that's going to be coming, a revenue that's going to be coming in, that can protect the payments on that debt. So, and there's also, when you're talking about debt, do you have a balloon payment? Do you have payments where you're paying, interest only, or do you have payments where you're paying some principal down and debt over time? And every one of those answers to those questions of what you do is going to be dependent on the individual company situations at that time.
Yeah,
okay,
I'd reframe one thing. I worry less about, SVB is going to take the company. SVB doesn't want to take startups.
That's true. I agree.
Know what to do with startups, but there's a painful cost to getting debt wrong on the other end. And the way I think about it for later stage companies is different, right? If you have a huge working capital pile, right, huge receivables, a lot of money coming in and out, right, financing that can make a tremendous amount of sense. But if you're thinking about early stage companies and you're thinking about venture debt or a term loan or something like that, the way that I think it makes the most sense to think about it is it's something that postpones your next equity round,
right,
out of which you are going to have to pay it back. So, if you have a good syndicate and they're going to backstop you, so that WTI or SVB is going to come in for venture debt round, and yes, maybe it's a little bit expensive, but you feel like, hey, if I get 6 more months of burn, it's going to really move the needle on the next equity round. So I'm going to take, whatever, I'm going to take $5 million in venture debt. But I know when I take that 5 million of my next round is paying that back.
Right.
I'm just taking it early, and there's a cost to it. But I think if you approach it with that mentality, it's probably right. If you approach it as the thing you're doing, as opposed to the thing you're doing between other things, that's when you can run into problems.
Well, that's a good way to put it. Okay, so Matt's got some very specific advice if you're a founder and you're thinking about taking debt as the thing that you're doing between other things versus the thing that you're doing. So you shouldn't think of it as the answer, but just a way to get to the next round in a more effective way. You can talk to Matt about it. And then Audrey, it sounds like you are very much in the camp of inspect the specific situation of what's happening with the company and figure out what some of the best ways are to leverage debt in those scenarios. And as a subject matter expert, I would assume that if a founder wanted to chat with you about that, would you be able to walk through that kind of situation with them? Okay. I've got one founder in mind right now, actually, that I think could really use your counsel. So thank you for that. Erica, anything else that you want to ask or comment on the debt world here?
All good so far.
Cool. Thank you so much, Audrey, for your expertise. It's just wonderful to have you and Dennis, both of you, in the community here. Really, really, really appreciate both of you. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.